Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine brought to you by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You can find us online at vainstitute.org. So many things going on, and this week we're going to spend some time on an initiative that we are partnered with, including the Middle Resolution and a bunch of folks called the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance. You can find out more about all of what we're doing online at voa.org. And joining us, one of our partners there, President of the Middle Resolution, Craig DiSesa. Welcome back to the program, Craig. How are you doing, sir?
I'm well. Thanks for having me again, Joe. I always look forward to chatting with you about the issue of education.
And coming up after Craig and I chat, it will be Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, who is perhaps one of the most enthusiastic champions of this movement. And somebody asked me, why I thought she was important to this, Craig. And I was curious, your abstract on it. I said, because I think she represents so much of what can happen for somebody if they, had the opportunity for school choice. You see somebody who didn't grow up with a lot. Dad came here with nothing, and she's the Lieutenant Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, successful Marine, and really cut her own path. And I think we're selling our kids short a lot when we just say, here's your assignment, go to this school, come out, and we'll find something for you to do when you get out.
Yeah, she's a huge inspiration. That's one of the reasons she won in 2021, coming out of basically nowhere. I mean, she as everybody probably knows, she was in the House of Delegates for a session back in the early 2000s, but for family reasons had to leave politics and then decided to get back into it. But her story is just pretty amazing, as you just sort of outlined. But she was given lots of opportunities. She had two parents who believed in her. They gave her opportunities and did not settle for the status quo. And she's now a huge champion for the work we're doing, as trying to provide children and parents, families with options in education, not just public schools, which, the public schools in some cases do a fine job, but in others they don't. And so she's a great spokesperson for that, being a minority and so forth, and demonstrating that you can, just because you don't have a lot, you can achieve a lot.
Well, she was just on Fox and Friends earlier this week, talking about the very NAEP report that shows the backslide, and it's just horrific results. Virginia's fourth graders, the biggest decline in the nation. We're failing the youngest, and really you don't get those years back. You can't say, well, we'll just have them double up on homework in fifth grade, because each grade builds on the next. So if a kid's behind by a grade or two at fourth grade, boy, we're really asking them to achieve a lot, especially in reading, Craig.
That is absolutely true. And as you mentioned, the NAEP scores are pretty alarming. We were actually, I'm looking at a chart here for the reading scores, measured back all the way into the early 1990s, and Virginia started to separate itself from the national average, increasing that gap over the years. And then in 2013, it leveled off in Virginia. And then in 2017, it dramatically dropped off to the point that you just referred to. And that is, we've had the largest decline in reading and math scores for fourth graders since 2017 in the country. And then you add on to that the learning loss that's occurred during COVID by the lockdowns, preventing kids from going to schools. And it exacerbated the whole problem. And now we have this situation where we have kids. I don't know if they're going to be able to recover, to be honest with you. The learning loss is so bad. In your wealthier communities, you will see an attempt to try to catch kids up. But in your low-income communities, your poor public schools performance in some of those communities, I'm not sure it can happen. And one of the questions I have is, the governor pointed out during his press conference a week and a half ago that there is $2 billion in COVID money sitting there ready to be used by public schools, and they're not taking advantage of it. And it's designed to help with learning loss. So why aren't they using that? And I haven't, frankly, found the answer to that question. But they keep screaming they want more money, but they've got money. and they're not using it. So I'm not sure what the solution is there. But the lieutenant governor wants to see parents have more options in education, and that's what the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance is all about.
Well, and that's really what it comes down to, is even if you drive the schools into taking and using that money, the learning loss, and I know Lieutenant Governor Sears was adamant of the complicity of the teachers union, American Federation for Teachers, and a couple of years ago the General Assembly allowed our local governments to begin collective bargaining. I know there's a branch of the teachers union in Charlottesville and Albemarle County licking their chops over unionizing the teachers into collective bargaining agreements with the local municipalities. And we've sort of been immune to a degree from their influence, but Randy Weingarten really was adamant about keeping the schools closed through COVID, and it's so patently obvious to me, Craig, from where I sit in the cheap seats, it was to protect the teachers from the students, but she didn't have the guts to say that. You just say, listen, we don't know what kids have COVID. They don't get as sick as adults, but my teachers are 50 years old and they have comorbidities or whatever. That's fine. That's what I expect a union to do. Look out for your members, but don't demand public policy as if somehow we're protecting our kids. That's literally peeing on my leg and telling me they're learning to read.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. Not of all of this recent data, what we've learned, and most of us have already known, that if you lower expectations, you're going to get lower performance, and that's what happened here in Virginia in 2017. The Board of Education members on that board, picked by Governor McAuliffe and Governor Northam, they defied the recommendation by many, and that was they lowered the accreditation standards so that more schools would be accredited. But as a result, you saw a decline in performance. And then in 2020, they reduced the standards, or the SOLs, cut scores that kids had to meet to pass SOLs. And we just saw a tremendous loss of performance. And now the governor has, and the Secretary Gadara and the Superintendent Balo, they have a huge task ahead of them. But I will say the things that they have put forth so far to try to reverse the course of the loss of student learning is remarkable. And I hope that when the things that they have to get approval for from the General Assembly, that the General Assembly will recognize that these are things we need to do in order to help these students. I don't know if the Lieutenant Governor has shared with you about some of the things they're doing, but it's quite an extensive list, and it's a huge hill to climb. But if they can get through this stuff, if they can actually put this stuff into action, I think we're going to see a huge improvement.
Craig DiSesa is on with us from the Middle Resolution, one of our partners in the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance, VOA.org. And Craig, I want to get into some of those, and we'll talk about them with the Lieutenant Governor as well. But I want your thoughts on some of these because obviously we don't want to talk politics per se. But I've watched a Virginia Senate that just seems hell-bent that if Glenn Youngkin had a bill that would cure cancer, they'd vote against it just so that Glenn Youngkin doesn't get a win. Talk about some of these, and are there spots in the General Assembly and the Senate that if it ever got to the floor, Chap Peterson or Joe Morrissey might break ranks with the Democratic Party and vote with them?
Well, yeah, if you could get it to the floor, and that's the big challenge. The Democrats on the Senate side have stacked the committees. Because they're in control, they get to pick who's on the committees. And in the House, the House usually does what we call parity on putting people on committees. So in the House, we have a 52 to 48. Republicans have a 52 to 48 advantage, so they get to pick the committees, and they'll put parity on the committees and subcommittees. In other words, for example, education. There's 12 Republicans, 10 Democrats. In the Senate, you've got a 21 to 19 count where the Democrats have the advantage on the number of senators in the chamber. But their education committee, I think, is 11 to 5. Mm-hmm. So you have to flip like 4 Democrats to get something passed in that committee. So getting it to the floor would be great, because I think you could probably get 1 or 2 Democrats to vote for some positive education choice policy. But in the Finance and Education and Health Committee, where this bill would have to go through, and it's the same in the Finance Committee. You have it's 11-5, 12-4. It's a crazy number. You have to flip. So they set those committees up to make sure that even if they lost 1 or 2 Democrats, they still get still have a lot of control over what policies get passed. So I don't know if we're going to be able to get anything done with this Senate this year. We're certainly trying very hard to do that, and with the Lieutenant Governor's lead. And I think the administration, although I don't know that they'll come out publicly and support this right now, they have told us that they are supportive of this type of legislation, but their first challenge is to turn the schools around, the public schools, and I absolutely agree with that. They need to do that.
So what are some of the highlights? Is there a remedial program that they're going to help the schools with or help parents with in accessing a remediation for this reading loss? And I'm going to start with the learning loss in reading, because I consider it the root of all learning, because the last time I checked, pretty much everything else you need to learn is written in a book somewhere. So let's start with the reading loss, Craig. What are some of the proposals that you find compelling that might maybe get its way all the way to the Virginia Senate floor?
Well, and I think some of the recommendations that I've got here in front of me he may not have to get to the floor. He may be able to do through his administration. But I'll give you some examples. They're going to empower parents with learning grants. In other words, micro grants. So I think it's $30 million that the governor, and that's a rounding error in the budget, because the budget's like $130 billion for 2 years. But he's got $30 million. They're going to offer up to parents their grants, and a parent can apply for that grant, and then that grant's got to be, it'll have to be used for education purposes, but it'll help the parent find tutoring or maybe a program online. I know I homeschooled one of my children, and I was able to buy a curriculum, and you can buy curriculum. So that's one thing they're doing, is offering these learning grants. The other thing they're doing is they're partnering with organizations like the Khan Academy. So Khan Academy is an online school, basically, that a parent can go in and pick and choose whatever class they need for their child. And so they're going to put $30 million into partnering with Khan Academy, and I think there's a couple others that that I haven't seen the names of. But so that's another opportunity for a parent to help get their student caught up, or their child caught up with their reading and the math. And I agree with you about reading and communications, writing and math are the basics. You've got to have those basics down in order to be a contributing member of society. If you want to get a good job and you want to help out in society, you've got to be able to read and write. Yeah. And you got to be able to do math, basic math.
So these are
things specifically.
Yeah, that then can either be done there, or at very least can be done as a budget thing that's going to have to come to some vote there, and hopefully we will see that. I'm also concerned that there are folks who want to keep education choice as a 2023 issue. I hope they can be herded in and say there'll be other things, folks. We don't need to give up on this. But talk about that. As we head forward into 2023, and a lot of the rhetoric of this critical race theory, the tribalism that has been fought, the Alliance Defending Freedom and their cases, Albemarle Schools versus CI, the group of parents, and that kind of thing. These court cases are about an educational paradigm that says, you're not going to get anywhere, and it's because of the other guys. We get it, but talk about impacting the neighborhoods that need educational reform the most. Are these parents getting it? I worry that we're second, third generation into the Great Society, and we've gaslit these parents into thinking, I'm never going to amount to anything, so let's make sure the check's in the mail. Are they getting it? Are they sensing these kids should be able to access better education?
I say there are some that are. I have been working I live in Hanover, just north of Richmond, and I've been working in the inner city community for 15 years with a separate organization, a ministry called Camp Hope Richmond. And so I interact with the parents and the children on a regular basis. And they're starting to wake up. They're starting to see that they need something different than what they've been given for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. There are a number of schools, private schools, for example, in Richmond, and there are plenty, and there are a few, I shouldn't say plenty, in other urban settings where they rely on something called the Education Improvement Tech Scholarship program. And we've had that since 2012. Unfortunately, it's a very small program, but a parent can apply for a scholarship. Mm-hmm. It's money that is donated, so you get a tax credit when you donate the money to a scholarship granting organization. And the parent can then use that money to go to some of these smaller private schools that are really designed to use that scholarship money to help these kids in the inner city. But it's not a lot. There's only like 4,500 kids in the whole state, and we got 1.2 million kids that are being educated in Virginia. So we've got to expand that program. One of the things the VEOA is doing is we are reaching into those communities. In fact, November 17th, we are having a rally with the Lieutenant Governor in Colonial Heights. And we are focused on bringing the minority communities to the rally so they can hear what the Lieutenant Governor has to say about education options and ways to get those education options, hopefully to drive a grassroots movement from the ground up to encourage legislators who oppose this stuff to start thinking twice about it and passing some legislation that will help kids in those communities you've been referring to.
Well, what about something that I remember being codified back in the late 2000s is something that I thought was very chilling, was that there were communities, especially the urban communities, the poor communities, especially in the black community, that had lost interest in achieving educational success. They viewed it as selling out. And I think some of it was in the roots of the development of our Common Core, was to try to come up with ways to engage these communities that had lost any interest in achieving anything educational. They didn't see either the point of it, or they saw a negative stigma to achieving high educational standards. What do we need to do? Do we need to get into the faith communities? Do we need to spend more time with parents? Do we need to do a better job of business development in the inner cities so that kids see the payoff of educational achievement?
All of the above. I think that the destruction of the nuclear family in the inner city has been a huge part of the problem. I'm a big believer that if we could restore the family with a father and a mother, these kids would do extremely well. But unfortunately, that's not what our policies have helped. And we know back in the Great Society that the black family, for example, was before the Great Society was about 80% intact, even though they had been through, obviously a lot of systemic racism back then, and they dealt with massive resistance. And then all of a sudden the Great Society starts, and all of a sudden out of wedlock birth skyrocketed because the federal government was paying basically young women to have babies, and it was discouraging young men to stay with their spouses or with their girlfriend and not to marry them. So this has been going on for generations, and we have to bring back the idea that a two-parent family is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, and getting an education is a good thing. And you mentioned churches. The churches have to be driving that message. I mean, it's obviously biblical, and so that's something that. But I think, unfortunately, the culture is such that that's frowned upon. But I sense that that's changing. I really do sense that that's changing, because what's been they've been doing for the last 50 years hasn't been working. So they realize we've got to change what we're doing. So hopefully that is changing.
Craig DiSesa is on with us from Middle Resolution, one of our partners in the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance, VOA.org, along with also Americans for Prosperity. And if you go to their action center, you'll see all the information. You can go off of the VEOA website, and there's a link to it, the Rally for Education Rights with Lieutenant Governor Sears in Colonial Heights there. And this is just the beginning of, it's the beginning of the beginning, isn't it, Craig? And I know that these campaigns are long, and we're coming to the end of the election, 45-day election season, and a lot of people are battle weary. But there is no more important part. And if you're a grandparent, if you're an aunt or an uncle, or your kids haven't started having kids yet, but you can have some influence, this is important for those force multipliers to be involved too, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely, and I do think the grandparents and that they have a role to play here, because I think they truly understand what needs to be done, and we need to give them the resources to do it. One of the things that folks tend to, especially on the left, who disagree with us on providing more options, is they don't want to talk about the fact that this is a solution to is one of the solutions, not the solution, to the school to prison pipeline. Mm-hmm. Kids are in public schools; they don't have any hope, so they're left to go to the streets. They're left to go to crime, and there's the path for them is not good. And if we can get them an education, no matter where it comes from, they have a real promise to be a contributor, a positive contributor to society. So this is a real criminal justice issue as well, and it's important that people recognize that.
When you talk about criminal justice issue as well, because if there's not a job for them in the mainstream, there's a job for them in the black market, usually working for one of the drug gangs, or at least the local adjunct to it, and that generally ends in a sticky end. And you see it in the gun violence, you see it in young people dead in the streets, in shootings over turf, over my block versus your block, and that influence of that criminal element is sneaking in where the education system has abdicated, hasn't it?
Yes, it absolutely has, because that's the way you get out of that situation, is you get an education. And kids today, what they see on the streets, what they see in their neighborhoods is, oh, that guy over there is driving around in a fancy car. Well, how did he get it? Well, he's selling drugs, right? Mm-hmm. And so they see that as the path to success. And we have to demonstrate to them that that's not the path to success. That's the path to, prison, or even worse. So, and I think they recognize that, but then they don't see any hope. So we haven't done our job as people advocating for good education policies. We haven't done our job in letting them know, hey, there is a way. There is a way for you to get out of this situation. And so, again, I go back to this really is a criminal justice issue. And a lot of people tell me, well, education or school choice is all about, helping rich white kids. And I'm like, first of all, if you're a white parent and you got a lot of money, you're not waiting around for what we're doing. You already moved your kid out of the public school. Right. Secondly, massive resistance was led by Democrat Senator Harry Byrd, back mm-hmm. in the 50s and the 60s. Yep. So there's plenty of blame to go around, but this is not what that's about anymore. If you look at schools that have popped up as a result of education choice, some of them are minority-majority schools. And so there's where you see the massive resistance is actually in the public schools today, in the inner city. That's where kids are trapped by their zip codes, and we've got to change that.
What about, and I know it's a nuanced thing, and it's just how it always is. But people talk about our charter schools. I'll talk to people who are education experts, but not from Virginia, and I always have to stop them when they get going on about charter schools. And I said, you don't understand. These are not like Pennsylvania's charter schools. These are schools started by the school division to say they started a charter school. Now, they may operate a little bit differently than the public school, but they're run by the same school board that runs all the other elementary and middle schools. Do we need reform in there, Craig? Because I feel like we do, but I'd like your thought on this. If we need to reform how we charter these charter schools.
Well, you're absolutely right. Your instinct is correct. We do need to change the way we approve charter schools. I think we have 7 or 8 that are functioning right now in Virginia. You go down south of the border in North Carolina, there's 170, and you go to other states, and there's all these charter schools. In Virginia, our Constitution, I believe in 71, was rewritten, and in there they gave school boards a lot of power.
Oh, yeah.
The school board, local school board, makes the final decision on whether a charter school application is approved. Well, the local school board doesn't want a charter school, okay, because that's just more work. It takes money out of their pocket, so they perceive, and so they don't approve these charter schools. There's no way to appeal that decision. And there was an attempt a number of years ago. Senator Obenchain had a resolution, and you have to change the Constitution now. That's the problem. It's a very high bar in Virginia, right, which it should be, in my opinion. But you have to pass a resolution 1 year, and the governor does not vote on it. It's passed by the General Assembly. You have to have an election, okay, and then you have to pass the resolution again, and then it goes on a referendum, a state amendment change to the Constitution. And we got very close a couple of years ago. We were on our second pass in the General Assembly, and 2 Republicans decided to walk, and it ended up in a tie, and the Democrats don't want it to change. They like having the local control, stopping charter schools, and so it died. So the governor was very creative with his laboratory schools and trying to develop, and they basically are charter schools, but they're being developed out of universities, HBCUs and other schools. So we are starting to grow the charter school. It's a small step, but it's better than nothing. But that's why we don't have charter schools in Virginia, because local school boards do not approve the charter application.
Well, let's circle on that, because I think it was creative, and we need creative people to be looking at this. And I've met Dick Howard. When people ask me about the Constitution of Virginia, I said, "You're not. This isn't George Mason who wrote this. This was a UVA professor and a couple of assistants from the NAACP and the ACLU. Trust me, he told me the whole story of how they wrote it. And so when you have these kind of things in the Virginia Constitution, the head scratching can begin, but that's where it comes from. The idea that there's a body of people who can be expert at something, and they're the ones who should teach it. I think, the charter schools I remember in Pennsylvania, where you could actually bring rocket scientists in, and then math becomes real to them, because you have actual rocket scientists saying, yes, by the way, it is rocket science. And so you didn't have to worry about, a teacher learning about rocket science. You could actually bring in the people who do it and who do it with passion. And I think that gives the student a lot more connection to the subject matter and lights up that STEM learning. Yeah,
absolutely. The charter schools, and if you look at New York City and other places, Washington, D.C., the charter schools are saving lives. They literally are saving lives, because their kids are getting educations. They're not being thrown back out on the streets. So why there's such an opposition to it and I do think that the NAACP is opposed to it. They're national. Has been opposed to charter schools, and as recently as just 4 or 5 years ago, they voted to not support charter schools, and it's just it boggles the mind why they would be opposed to something like that. It's just there's a paradigm shift that has to occur here, and it has to start with the people. It has to start with the grassroots, because they got to let legislators know that the status quo is not going to work anymore, especially in Virginia, we've got to change the way we educate people. And I'm not saying the public schools are going anywhere. They're here to stay.
Oh, sure, but they get better. When there's school choice, the public schools actually get better, too.
That is actually very true. There's a great paper out there. I may have referred to it last time we talked, called "Who's Afraid of School Choice." You type that in the search bar, and that paper will come up. And they've done extensive work over the last, I want to say, 20 years, and looked at where education choice was offered up in districts. And in every single case, the public schools received more money and the per pupil expenditure, and they improved. It wasn't a huge improvement, but it was incremental improvements. Mm-hmm. I think in Dade County, Virginia, or Florida, which is where Miami is, I think 47% of the kids now use some form of education choice. And
wow.
Florida is leading the country on this. Jeb Bush, Governor Bush, back in the early 2000s, began this battle and worked very, very hard to promote more options for parents. And today they have 9 to 10 programs. In fact, tomorrow at 12 noon, you can go on our website, veoa.org, and register for a coalition call. And Michael Benjamin is our featured speaker. He was there at the beginning in 2000 when they started to promote education choice in Florida. And this gentleman he's a pastor, African American.
Wow, yes.
Has been in this battle for a long time. And so that's a call that people can join tomorrow if they want to go on and register.
And that's an important one because we're here back where they were in 2000. So we need to kind of be able to kind of snap ourselves up to it, don't you think?
Absolutely. And he's got a great story, and he's got great anecdotes and great solutions to how we move the ball on this.
And don't let them demagogue it. If money moves around, it doesn't go away from somebody because the greatest hits of the 60s, 70s, and 80s politically is, well, how are you going to replace that money? And you don't have to. Don't fall for it. Craig DiSesa, Middle Resolution, and our partners with the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance. Looking forward to the event with you and us and Winsome Sears on the 17th. That's a great conference call as well. And I appreciate your tip on that as well, veoa.org. And you have a wonderful weekend.
You do the same, Joe. Thanks for the time. Thanks for giving me the time to talk about this. I really appreciate it.
Coming up next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio, her ears must be buzzing because we kept talking about Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears.